Thank you for choosing to attend this presentation. My name is John Blake and I'm a Senior Associate Professor at the University of Aizu in Japan. My topic today is Learning by Teaching, Facilitating Peer-to-Peer Tuition in Content and Language Integrated Learning. As you can see from the overview, this presentation is broken down into 7 parts. First, I'll begin by explaining my teaching context. Then I'll go into a little bit more depth about what content and language integrated learning is, explain the principle of learning by teaching, and then give you the theoretical basis for this and tell you about the practical implementation. Finally, I'll come to the evaluation of the course itself and the lessons learned. Let me tell you about the context, courses and learners. We're based in a small university in rural Japan, and as you can see from the pictures, it's quite cold. The courses that I teach are content courses, primarily in computer science, logic, and natural language processing. All courses are delivered in English, but the students have varying degrees of proficiency. The class size is reasonably large with 50 students. The learners are all computer science majors. 90% are Japanese and 90% are male. Everybody owns a smartphone and there's free access to Wi-Fi on campus and in these university dorms. Content and language integrated learning is what you would expect. First of all, the teacher focuses on the content and enables learners to understand the content. But simultaneously, the teacher also focuses on the language used to deliver the content. In my case, I deliver content in English, and so students have to focus on learning English at the same time as learning the content. The course assessments are arranged about the content itself, but in order to pass the assessments, students axiomatically need to be able to write in English or speak in English using the required terminology. Here, let me explain my motivation for moving to a learning by teaching approach. My situation, like many teachers, is one teacher, but with many students. Now, for one teacher to develop materials, it's possible, but to develop materials that can be individualized to students, that would be very time consuming. Teachers often produce text-based materials, but students often prefer multimodal materials, particularly audio and video materials. There's also a difficulty to teach in real time, particularly during the pandemic. We have lots of problems with Wi-Fi dropping and students or teachers losing access to the online video conferencing systems. Here's a possible solution. Switch from the one-to-many approach to a many-to-many model. So here you have many students who are making materials for many other students. This will be completely learner-centered, with the students making materials for themselves by themselves. Here the students can create their multimodal materials themselves, and the student developers learn through the process because they need to learn the content in order to create the material about the content. And then the users of the materials also learn from the materials developed. It seems like a win-win scenario. The theoretical basis for a learning by teaching approach is actually very simple. Even without going to the research literature, we can see how good it is. First of all, let's think about motivation. In this scenario, students learn to help not only themselves, but to help others. And they need to understand the content to teach the content. So clearly here there's a motivation. They have a real audience and they want to be able to teach that real audience things that are correct. Secondly, the active learning aspect. To teach something, students need to read, listen or watch to understand the content. Then they need to actually create some explanation, which in my course is either audio or video explanations. So what that means is they have to process the content, simplify the content, and then somehow make the content relevant to the peers. They've got a lot of processing going on. So they have the input, the processing, and the output. It seems like a perfect model for active learning. And the third one is simply time on task. To learn something, students read about it and then they make the notes. And then to teach it, they also have to make some notes, or possibly even a script or a semi-script for their audio or video explanation. Then they record. But of course, like many people, they don't get it right the first time, so they record again, and sometimes again and again and again. What this means is they often spend a lot of time on task, and as we know, the longer a student spends on a task, the more likely they are to make progress. In terms of the practical implementation of this approach, there are 5 areas I want to focus on. The first is to make sure what you assess is what you want the students to do, because what gets assessed gets done. So we need to make sure that they're aligned together. Also, audio materials, sound is king. If the sound quality is low, the materials are unusable. So what I had in the assessment, I had a rubric that says to achieve 100% grade, you need to have clear audio. In terms of slideshow materials, I think it's a great idea to provide lots of examples, but allow students the creativity to do their own way. You also need to raise the issues of copyright, because if you want to put stuff on the internet, you need to ensure that it's not been copied from somewhere else. For the slideshow materials, the idea is to use a lot of scaffolding. So here we can get the students to help themselves develop materials. In terms of video materials, this is the most complex area. So video production is divided into 3 bits: pre-production, production, and post-production. And here I get students to submit work at the end of each of these stages. So at the end of the pre-production, they'll submit the script, the storyboard, and when necessary, a shot list. In the production stage, they'll explain how they're going to choose the location, what the actors are going to do, how they're going to move, and how they're going to control the ambience, which will especially mean the lighting, but sometimes it's controlling the ambient sound. And finally, in post-production, about the editing and subtitling. My students are all computer science majors, and they have no trouble at all with the video editing, and I suspect many of the budding YouTubers would have no trouble as well. Final point was where to share materials. Now, a lot of students were reticent to share materials online, but they were happy to share materials with their peers behind a password protected area. We use a Moodle learning management system, so it was easy to house the materials there to be shared. The course was evaluated by students, by professors, and the tutor reflected on the course as well. In terms of student feedback, we used a triangulated approach with observation, focus group, and questionnaire. The key outcome, however, was students really enjoyed watching video explanations produced by other students. They were less keen on the audio explanations, particularly when they were in English, although many of them did like the Japanese explanations, but I guess that's no surprise. In terms of the types of video, so some students created talking heads where you just have their head. Some students created live action where they had a couple of actors kind of acting out a scenario, but many created animated slideshows, and those were the most preferred ones. In terms of the professors' feedback, a lot of professors thought it was a win-win scenario, since the professor would have to make fewer materials themselves and let the students make more materials. In fact, from my course, with 50 students in the course, over the course, which was held over an 8-week period, the students produced somewhere in the region of 400 digital artifacts. So each student produced about 8 digital artifacts. Some of them were high quality, some of them were medium, and some were unusable. But the problem now is not lack of materials. The problem now is lack of time to sort through which materials I can use in future iterations of this course. Professors also advocated the use of the teach to learn approach, and the idea that if students can teach something, they learn it. It seemed very easy for people to believe that works. 3 of them said they will consider adopting the same approach themselves. In terms of tutor reflection, well, it's time intensive to create the initial system, And the key bottleneck is quality control. When students submit materials, the teacher really needs to quality control and check which ones are good to use with the rest of the class and which ones are less good. So in my course, it was impossible to check through all the materials. So as soon as I found suitable versions to use, I uploaded those for the other students, and I put the remaining materials in a folder for me to look at when I have time. And the final one would be, I would really recommend the use of animated PowerPoints, animated slideshows, rather than making live action video, because it's just much easier for the students. With live action, you really have to consider the lighting and the noise and positions and shots, whereas with the animated slideshows, it's just much easier to get a very polished finished product. So to sum up, I think there are 8 things that I've learned and I'll make sure I'll do next time. The first one is to ensure the students really know the intended audience. So I told them that they're creating materials for other students to learn, but in fact it's not just that. They're creating materials for their peers in their class to learn, but also for every future cohort of students who takes the same course. Once they knew that, they were much more motivated to leave a legacy of what they learned for future students. Second, to explain the rationale for Learn to Teach. If they know that by creating the materials, their aim is to learn, not just to create the materials, then they'll be much more motivated and focus on the learning side as well. Third, clear rubrics. This is absolutely vital. If the students know exactly what to do, you will waste a lot less time in re-explaining and giving more examples. So I think the clarity of instructions is key. In my case, because the students are not particularly great at English, I have to give written instructions, spoken instructions, and sometimes check from the students what they really understand from the instructions. Next is the assessment criteria, and I mentioned before, it's key to align them with the activities. If you assess them on what you want them to create, then you're more likely to get good products. So for me, for the audio explanations and the video explanations, sound quality had to be sufficient. The content had to be accurate. There were time limitations, so it was no more than 1 minute and no less than 30 seconds for many explanations. And if their materials fitted in there, then they were able to get 100%. Showing students how lighting and sound affects video quality saves them a lot of time. So I explain this at the very beginning of the course, rather than waiting for them to produce materials that are not very good and they have to waste the time to create them again. In terms of the video production progress, I think it's vital that you check at the pre-production and post-production stages to ensure that the mist doesn't go through. If they make a mistake at the pre-production stage, then they will waste a lot of time in the 2 other stages creating materials that were unusable. And finally, be aware, live action is the most difficult of the video formats. For me, in future courses, I won't allow the students to do that. I'm just going to recommend that they focus on animated slideshows, because I think the chance that they can produce materials that are high quality, usable, and will last is much higher. Okay, finally, thank you for sticking through to the end of the presentation. If you have any comments, questions, or suggestions, I'd be really happy to hear. Please check out my website or send me an email and get in touch. Thank you very much.